Good evening. Today is May 17, 2021, and this is the 52nd episode of New Paradigms. I'm your host, as usual, Sargis Sangari. Returning today for our continued conversation on the Chinese Communist Party and the Middle East crisis is a good friend, Clare M. Lopez. Clare Lopez is a founder and also the president of Lopez Liberty LLC, which has a mission of alerting and educating Americans on a range of national security threats, international, as well as from the Islamic movements, the Muslim Brotherhood, and collaborators among the rank and file of the Marxist communists that may be operational in our country today. In 2020, Clare was named the senior analyst for Ravinia Associates, a strategic cooperative communication firm that is based out of Virginia. She also worked with Bishop E.W. Jackson and the STAND organization. From 2014 to 2020, Lopez served as a vice president for research and analyst at the Center for Security Policy. She has been a senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research and a member of the Board of Advisors for the Canadian McKinsey Institute. In 2016, she was named to Senator Ted Cruz's political campaign's National Security Advisory Team. Lopez has been an instructor on Iran, Hezbollah, and the red, black, green axis for understanding the threat, a nationwide training program on the global Islamic movement and jihadi networks. More recently, Ms. Lopez acted as an advisor and mentor to the U.S. Special Forces students in the fall of 2020, the Department of Defense course that was run by Reservoir International. From 2013 to 2016, Ms. Lopez served as a member of the Citizens Commission on Benghazi and continues as a member of the Citizens Commission on the National Security. Formerly the vice president of the Intelligence Summit, she was a career operations officer with the CIA Clandestine Services, a professor at the Center for Counterintelligence, and a security studies executive director of the Iran Policy Committee from 2005 to 2006, and has served as a consultant, instructor, intelligence analyst, and researcher for a variety of defense firms. She was named the 2011 Lincoln Fellow at the Claremont Institute. In February 2012, Ms. Lopez was named a member of the Congressional Task Force on National and Homeland Security, which focuses on the electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, threats to the nation and serves as its director for counterterrorism. She has served as a member of the Board of Advisors, Directors for the Center for Democracy and Human Rights in Saudi Arabia, the United West, and a Voice of the Coptics. She has been a visiting researcher and guest lecturer on counterterrorism, national defense, and international relations at Georgetown University. Ms. Lopez is a regular contributor on a range of media on subjects related to Iran, the Middle East, and the co-author of 2 published books on Iran. She is the author of The Rise of Iran Lobby and co-author editor of the Center's Team B2 study, Sharia, the Threat to America, as well as the Tiger Team's The Secure Freedom Strategy, a plan for victory over the global jihad movement. She co-authored Gulen and the Gulenist movement with CPS Vice President for Outreach Christopher Holton, See No Sharia, Countering Violent Extremists, and the Disarming of Americans Frontline of Defense with Frank Gaffney. CPS president and its both editor and a co-author of the Center's Ally No More, Erdogan's New Turkish Caliphate, and the Rising Jihadist Threat to the West. Lopez received a BA in Communication and also French from Notre Dame College of Ohio, and has an MA in International Relations from the Maxwell School of Syracuse University. She completed Marine Corps Officer Candidate School, OCS, and Quantico, Virginia, before declining a military commission to join the Central Intelligence Agency. Clare, it's great to have you back again with us to talk about these issues. For those in our audience who are not aware, you were also on the short list, reportedly being considered by the previous POTUS to be the Deputy National Security Advisor to him. It's good to have you back here, and welcome.
Thank you. But we do have to disregard some of those, media extravagances.
We will. You have a long bio, so we try our best to make sure we cover all the ranges of the topics there for discussion. Clare, I know that we started with the Middle East, and we still have to consider it. There's, I guess, a couple of options left now. Either Israel's going to finish these type of operations within the next few days, or you're looking at a more prolonged war and maybe a more bloody war. Where are we right now in the Middle East? If you could give us kind of a recap as to where we are and where we're going to be heading.
Well, operations by the Israeli Defense Force have been going on for more than a week now in response to the unprovoked attacks from the jihad terrorist organization Hamas, which of course is on the U.S. State Department's foreign terrorist organizations list, along with attacks from their allies in Gaza, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, likewise jihadi terrorists, both of them supported, they're armed, funded, trained by the Iranian regime, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and Quds Force. So operations continue in order to degrade not just the stockpiles of Hamas weaponry, ammunition, rockets, missiles, and so forth. There's been a concerted effort to collapse the many miles of tunnels running under Gaza, sometimes called the Metro, for how extensive the tunnels are. But within those tunnels were kept a lot of armaments, rockets, missiles, as we said, ammunition, and so forth. Many of the jihadis have also been eliminated in those tunnels recently. But the operations do continue at this point in time. The attacks out of Gaza, I should note, attacks that are being launched from civilian areas using Gazan civilians as human shields, a war crime, number one, and aimed at civilian population centers in Israel, its cities, Sderot, very close to Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, as far north as Haifa and other places, aiming at those civilian populations, war crime number two. But so in order to degrade those capabilities on the part of Hamas and PIJ for short, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Islamic or the IDF operations do continue at this time.
Look, Clare, when you look at the region, I've brought this up before. I know that there's fighting taking place specifically right now that has focused the entire world now again on what is happening between the supposedly Palestinians and the Israelis. But I think it's a broader kind of a look at it. If you look at it from the perspective of other players in the region, as you mentioned, Iran's 26 days away from an election. Recently, even the state media for Iran had done a survey within Iran asking people if they are excited or want to participate in elections, and 30% of people, literally for the state media, said that we do not want to even participate. They're not excited about what is happening as far as internally in Iran is concerned. And I think this provides a kind of a distraction for Iran while everybody is focused directly on what is happening supposedly between the Palestinians and Israel. Is there any broader ties that you could talk about here specifically with how Iran might be the source of these type of operations?
Sure. Really, the Iranian regime, which of course is dominated, as is the presidential race, dominated by the IRGC, is the head of the snake. It has deployed proxy jihad militias all over the Middle East. We're talking today about Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, but of course there's also Hezbollah up in Lebanon. There are the Houthi rebels in Yemen. There are Iraqi Shiite militias, sometimes called the Hashd-e-Shabi, in Iraq. So they have deployed, these jihadi militias all over the Middle East. They have an ongoing working alliance with Al-Qaeda since well before 9/11. It goes back to 1990, as a matter of fact. Hezbollah has been training the Taliban in Afghanistan also well before 9/11, since before 9/11. So the malevolent activities by this Iranian regime span the entire region, but even far beyond the Middle East region. And it is the Iranian regime that backs Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. I should also add that Qatar, although it is a Sunni regime in the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, is aligned with the Shiite regime of Iran and also helps to fund Hamas, as does, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood, also Sunni, Muslim Brotherhood regime of Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey, a staunch, longtime supporter of Hamas against the Israeli state.
I know that we've looked at all those main characters in the past. I know from the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement, we had looked at an article that said who speaks for Islam or who should. And I know that these are competing interests, where Erdogan wants to return to be that caliphate, which you have written about and spoken about before. And at the same time, you have Israel, Egypt, that is now in the process of trying to negotiate a possible peace, with Iran jockeying to be the lead of Shia within the region. But my interest would be, in this case, you see that as you had mentioned last week, the Israeli government is still not really formulated and it's not strong enough currently. Are they trying to use this to exploit the fact that you still don't have a formed government in Israel to try to make a change? Or is it really simply the fact that Iran is trying to kind of take the eyes of the world off of it by having them focus directly on what is happening in the current region with the shooting that's taking place? Majority of those missiles, as you had mentioned, are actually coming from Iran. What is the future that we need to look at? What would your advice be to the administration?
Well, last week, as you say, I mentioned uncertainty in three capitals. Obviously, in Washington, D.C., where the Biden administration is making a real turn away from the policies of his predecessor, President Donald Trump, who had brokered the Abraham Accords, had forged such a strong relationship, both official and personal, with the state of Israel and with its prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. So not even quite sure who's in charge at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue these days. But weakness also, as you mentioned there, Sargis, in Jerusalem, because after 4 elections, the outcome remains deadlocked, with no individual yet being able to put together a coalition. Needed 61 seats within the Knesset. But interestingly enough, I think that this offensive by the terrorists out of Gaza has actually strengthened the position of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who remains Prime Minister at this time. The third capital, of course, is Ramallah, where Mahmoud Abbas is serving, I think it might be the 17th year of a 4-year term, was going to have held elections this month of May 2021, but realized belatedly that Hamas was very likely to win those elections, including in Judea and Samaria. So he had to figure out a way out of that. And that is part of the uncertainty and the chaos, stirring up conflict inside of Israel, inside of Jerusalem, on the Temple Mount and so forth was part of Abu Mazen's tactic for deflecting attention away from the fact that he had just canceled elections at the Palestinian Authority once again. So uncertainty in all those three capitals. But where this is going, I really think that the longer this goes on, the more clearly the world sees who are the aggressors in this case and are beginning to realize the role, yes, of the Iranian regime behind all of it, and to realize that Israel is simply defending its civilians from an onslaught of rocket and missile attack by terrorists out of Gaza. Where this will go, it's hard to say because, of course, this is not about territory at all, is it? I mean, if one reads the Hamas covenant, and I call it a covenant because it's an agreement not between men, but between Hamas and Allah. It's a covenant. They consider it a sacred covenant. And in the preamble of that covenant by Hamas, it says, Israel exists and will continue to exist until Islam obliterates it as it has obliterated others before it. So very clearly, this is not about land. It's not about territory. It's about sacred doctrine, as the jihadis would have it, that hold the territory of the entire Levant, once conquered by Islam, to be waqf, W-A-Q-F, land endowed by Allah in perpetuity to Islam, must be gotten back if it is ever lost. And then, of course, the other doctrine that applies here is the doctrine of dhimmitude, or the ahadimma, as it says in the books of Islamic law. The Jews are not supposed to be powerful, successful, a thriving, modern 21st century country. They are supposed to be subjugated as dhimmis, second class or worse. Subjugated under the rule of Sharia. So those are the doctrines that will drive this as far as the eye can see. But for the moment, Israel has to defend itself and to try to degrade Hamas and PIJ as much as possible.
I think you kind of laid it out there. It seems that, politics, both in elections and the Palestinians, amongst the Palestinians and also Iran, may have been the leading cause for this. I mean, these missiles have existed before. Why were they taken out now and used? And what was the reasoning behind it? And I think it's a matter of just getting our focus. If we're trying to help Israel, we need to do one thing: focus, as you are focusing your discussion right now on specifically Iran, and understanding that all these are tied to Iran's operations. If we do that in general across the platforms of media and through the current administration, I think we're going to be well served, and it's going to help us leverage also against the current Iranian government. As I said, when you have 33% of Iranians in Iran being interviewed by state media saying that we don't even want to participate in the elections, those are keys that we need to be looking at. And if we are going to get involved, instead of trying to give guidance on Israel how to protect itself, maybe start focusing the ire on against Iran again, to give us at least leverage in our discussions with the current government, hoping that to see maybe possibly a moderate, if that, change in the Iranian positions. But I will tell you, Claire, and the reason why we have you here is really looking at the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I know me and you were talking offline, and we specifically talked about what China is kind of trying to do within the region. I had written some articles on backyard wars going back for a couple of years now on the Chicago Daily Herald here that really focused on how China is moving in the region. And I have to tell you, everywhere Iran is, the Chinese Communist Party is there. And we know that they're trying to develop a railhead that is going from Iran into Basra, port of Iraq. And from there, they're going to try to develop the highway directly up north into the Kurdish regional government, take highway number 2 into Syria. So as Israel's still busy trying to figure out, do they finally conduct a final assault and finish this? Because there's a lot of hawks if you want to call them, and the Israeli structures of the government outside of the politicians that are finally saying, we got to finish this. Because as we keep on constantly playing around with these small skirmishes, you have Iran still working with the Chinese Communist Party, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and developing infrastructures that allow them to really control not just Iran's future, also Iraq, into Syria. And if a lot of our viewers are not aware of, when Russia was conducting airstrikes in Syria, they were using Iran airspace to do it. So guess what? The second that highway system is developed, those railheads are set up, then that means the Chinese and the Russians are going to be able to use Iran to maneuver throughout the entire Middle East. What is the danger? Is it what I kind of laid out, or is it broader than that, or even bigger than that when it comes to China and how it's affecting the issues in the Middle East?
Well, I think you laid it out very well there, Sargis. China, of course, has a view of itself. The Communist Chinese Party that rules China has a view of itself as the natural hegemon of the entire world. It believes that it is on course, 100-year marathon, as the title of Michael Pillsbury's book has it, from Mao Zedong's conquest of China in 1949 until 2049, that period of time to emerge as the dominant power on earth, displacing the United States. And they speak of this quite openly, the senior officials of the CCP. Well, the Belt and Road Initiative is a big part of that. And that means extending rail lines, roads, and also a network, a string of pearls, as they call it, of ports in key critical areas astride important waterways and straits around the world. And their vision, yes, goes certainly all the way to the Persian Gulf. The Chinese government and the Iranians concluded an agreement not very long ago, multi-year, multi-billion-dollar agreement under which the Iranians would get relief from sanctions by selling oil to China, which really needs it. And China then, in return, would build out its Belt and Road Initiative infrastructure all the way westward to the Persian Gulf. Now, you know, we were also talking about the expansion of China's influence and aspirations, objectives, all the way to the Western Hemisphere too. You know, in the Western Hemisphere here, North, Central, South America, and the Caribbean.
No, I know. As you were speaking too, I know you had the slides ahead of schedule, but we were looking at some of the discussion points on the cartel. I know that in Near East we had written an article on how the cartel and ISIS are pretty much tied together to include how they were moving items through the mafia out of Italy. And it seems like the same networks are being used now. And China is pushing a lot of fentanyl directly into our country. And for those who don't know, I have stated this once before, you know, when we try to do good things across the spectrum with the development of various different countries, I know that, and you know this well, we took diesel fuel, we gave it to the North Koreans, hoping that we could alleviate some of their shortages for their fuel. And what did they do? They picked up that diesel fuel, they actually used it to create fentanyl drugs, and then they basically sold them on the markets to the Japanese mafia. From there, it was utilized to make money and purchase items in South America for the key components of what they needed for their missile technology, and what they could not get as far as those key components that they brought from South America, they actually got it from the Iranians. So, you know, the adversary who wants to be in the lead is going to use whatever to his capacity to be in that lead. And I think in this case, what you're laying out is China is using every method possible to include pushing fentanyl directly into the streets of America to be able to be that top dog in the lead. So they have us fighting on multiple avenues that we're not sure how to deal with. Some of the other methods that they have, Claire, if you could kind of look at, not just in South America, but other places. I know that even recently, the president of the Philippines just came out and told his ministers don't even speak about the Southeast Asia issue because of the pressures that are being laid on him, not just by China, but the information operations that China uses to move its initiative, their 100-year plan forward.
Well, you know, as long ago as 2017, the Chinese Communist Party media mouthpiece, the Xinhua News, published a quote attributed to Xi Jinping that said that China, even at that point, 4 years ago now, was engaged in a people's war against the United States. And that didn't mean simply tit for tat countering the sanctions, the tariffs that President Trump at that time had levied against China, but it meant all-out war along the lines of the book, The Unrestricted Warfare, 1999 master's thesis written by two Chinese colonels in the People's Liberation Army. And the span of sectors of warfare literally spelled out in that slim volume, Unrestricted Warfare, include everything you can think of: information warfare, economic warfare, space warfare, yes, biochemical warfare, and many others. I was going to mention there, you had an article up showing a 200 and something +% increase in the amount of fentanyl crossing the U.S. border to the south from Mexico. Well, I was looking at an article just very recently talking about how Texas Governor Greg Abbott was speaking to the media, and he said that between last year, meaning April of 2020 until April of 2021, that's just last month, the amount of fentanyl seized at the border was up over 800%. Now, that's the amount seized. Now, what had happened is that previously, China was shipping fentanyl, finished fentanyl, through the Mexican drug cartels, using them across our border and then up into the United States. Well, under President Trump, he cracked down hard on that. And so the Chinese Communist Party said, okay, we won't do that anymore. But then what they did is they began shipping the precursor chemicals needed to make fentanyl to Mexico for the drug cartels there to finish up, mixing up into batches and then across the border. So 800% increase in a year is just how much they caught, not how much got across without being seized, without being caught. So, you know, that's certainly the biochemical warfare on top of the export of what we call the CCP virus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the coronavirus, which I'm glad to see is getting more and more attention in the media of late, questioning where it comes from. Obviously, we know it comes out of the offensive biological weapons labs of the Chinese Communist Party, and especially the military labs of the People's Liberation Army. So that's the biochemical part of it. You know, right here inside of the United States, working out of its consulates. You know, China used to have 5 consulates in the United States, in addition to its embassy in Washington, D.C. and United Nations mission in New York, but 5 consulates: New York, Houston, Chicago, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. Well, a year ago, then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo shut down the Houston consulate. And he said it was because they were conducting espionage and intellectual property theft out of the consulate. Oh, well, okay, well and good. But if he shut down Houston for that reason, then why are the other 4 still operating? So it obviously was something more than that. And indeed it was, and we can find this in the open source media, Radio Free Asia, for example. The Chinese sent another undercover team of the PLA to the Houston consulate with orders to establish, to draw up a list of Americans using AI, artificial intelligence, data mining techniques, a list of Americans they thought would be susceptible to messaging Antifa, pro-BLM messaging. Then they used that list and they made videos on TikTok and shoved those videos out to their list of designated American citizens on how to conduct street protests and riots in the streets of America. That's an act of war. I really wish Secretary Pompeo would have said so out loud, because that's why the Houston consulate was closed. So that's just a bit of an overview, tip of the iceberg of what the Chinese Communist Party is doing in its unrestricted warfare against America.
No, they're doing it, and they're doing it through our press media, and they're using U.S. dollars. Even the money that we sent to South America to help alleviate the whole migration issue that we're dealing with right now is really going to the Chinese conglomerates, and that's one of the problems we run into. Look, you know, when when the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement was an advisory group for the Assyrian Army, the Christian Assyrian Army between 2014 and 2017, where we were fighting both in Syria and Iraq to preserve the roots of Christianity. One of my commanders was ambushed by a group of Kurdish YPG. And at that time of the ambush that took place against him, you had Antifa US and Antifa Europe on the ground working with that particular group. They didn't go there to learn lessons to come back and not to apply them here. And you worked in the clandestine operational side of the house with the CIA, and I've fought against insurgencies, and I've actually, you know, some would say that you led the insurgency where you were operating the Assyrian army on the ground. But we know that these are just actual processes by which you either defeat a government or support a government in the long run. And it seems like those lessons learned are even being applied here. We even saw in the protests that were taking place initially going back to last year, where we were taking pictures of individuals that these were off of simple facial recognition systems out there that literally, if you looked at their Twitter feed, everywhere else, they were all tied directly to the Chinese Communist Party leadership. So I do not understand why we have kind of turned a blind eye on these issues. As you know, the 2 shows prior to you coming in for our discussion, I had even the gentleman who had looked at working on the systems of systems, which he holds patents on the F-35 technologies, which the Chinese literally stole from us. And it is possible, based on what he has said and what he said in his discussions with us, that there's a backdoor through Japan and through Taiwan that is taking a lot of our technology and feeding it back into the Chinese Communist Party control, to include possibly our technologies when it comes to our satellite technology. And I don't know if people understand how vast this war is. If you could let us know, Claire, I mean, are they fighting us just here on the ground in the Middle East and South America on the economic side of the house, or are we even fighting them in space, for the better term, when it comes to technological advancements that we think that we had the lead on?
Yeah, no, this is all-out warfare. Again, back to Sun Hua, people's war. That does not mean just sanctions and tariffs. It means all-out war in, I think it's 23 categories listed in unrestricted warfare. You know, I was going to mention, in addition, you know, to that kind of support internally inside of the United States to Antifa and BLM, the Antifa cadres, militias, have also taken training elsewhere. They were in Hong Kong. And there's been some tremendously good work done on these subjects by a couple, more than a couple, but I'll name a couple, citizen journalists like Andy No, whose book Unmasked came out earlier this year. It's a fantastic read. I read it earlier. Others, you know, Ian Miles Chong, you can find him on Twitter as well, but documented how Antifa militants had trained in Hong Kong with the Hong Kong Freedom Democracy movement back when there were so many demonstrations there, and then brought those tactics back here to the United States to be used on domestic soil. So this is all-out warfare. It spans the gamut of all those sectors. I mean, we are mistaken if we think that this is just about tanks and planes and ships and troops. It is not. As a matter of fact, if you go all the way back, many centuries back, to The Art of War by Sun Tzu, you will see that the highest objective for military strategy by the Chinese is to fight a war without ever firing a gun. It is to win the war. It is to win the battle before the tanks and the planes and the ships and the troops ever move. To fight that battle, to win that battle internally, to hollow us out through conflict and chaos internally in the United States to the point that we are too weak to do anything, and that is before any of the kinetic, violent warfare has even begun.
It's kind of sad to say, but it's a reality. Unfortunately, what bothers me is we all know that, the experts know that, individuals who are, have been in the fight know that, but it's hard to get it moving through policymakers for whatever reason, and maybe it's just the way that we're still established.
It is, but I should add one more thing that I missed. Excuse me, I'm sorry, and that is a really important battlefront. And that is the information warfare battlefront. I mentioned what they were doing out of the Houston consulate, pushing videos out on social media through TikTok. But it's not just TikTok. The Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, has relations with all of our major media. National Pulse, Raheem Kassam's outlet, has documented this very, very well, the National Pulse. And he's documented how every single one of our major media, TV outlets like ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, on and on, as well as print media, Washington Post, New York Times, etc., and of course social media like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, and yes, of course, TikTok, every single one of those and many more, and or their parent companies have business inside of China, which they look at as a 1.4 billion plus potential market they're not willing to jeopardize. So the information warfare front is so critical, and the Chinese are masters at this, and we are not so much.
No, look, it's not just the Chinese are masters. It's some of our adversaries are. When we used to talk to commanders about giving them a scenario just in Afghanistan, how would you approach it? The commander would say, well, I would bring my battalion here. I would set up security parameters here. I would go after these targets and these targets. And you would ask him, okay, you have that capability, but what is your outcome that you're trying to achieve? And that would be very sketchy in it. But if you looked at it from how our adversaries there, they looked at it from the information operational side of the house first. And if we understand that concept and we focus on information operations at the beginning and then worry about combat operations as tied to the information operational side, then we'll understand it better. Like we said earlier, Israel is fighting a fight right now to survive. But as they're fighting that fight to survive, Iran is building railheads still, regardless, that is trying to expand a highway system all the way into Syria to allow the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Chinese to move around the battlefield. And do not make any mistakes. Wherever you have Iranians, you have the Chinese, to include in the tri-border area in South America. So that needs to be understood. And if you understand that, I think at least we'll have a means and ways to affect things. But with that said, Claire, over the next 5 years, and I don't believe hope as being a course of action, do you see anything positive that we might be able to do to reverse some of the problems that we are going to be faced with and some of the gains that the Chinese have made now, not just in the information operational war in their country, but across the board throughout the globe?
Well, I mean, we know, of course, that President Trump made a very good head start on this. We might recall a short video snippet that was aired, I think it was January this year, 2021, on the Tucker Carlson show on Fox News. And later, it just, went all over social media, YouTube, and elsewhere. But it was a video of an academic named Di Dongsheng. And Di Dongsheng is a dean at Renmin University in China. And he was speaking up on a stage. It looked like it was probably maybe in the university with a big audience, out in the hall. And he was openly boasting. And by the way, this was shot professionally. It was not somebody's cell phone camera. It was meant to get out and to be seen by us in the West, in the United States especially. But he was bragging to a very appreciative audience who clapped along, bragging how the Chinese Communist Party had succeeded in penetrating and influencing all of our top U.S. Circles of influence, our power elite circles, he called it. And then he said, well, and then came Donald Trump, and we couldn't do that anymore. So we had to get rid of him. Well, that kind of sums up how the Chinese look at our previous president and the current one, whom they obviously view as deeply compromised, at a minimum, extremely weak, and open to being taken advantage of. So we could be in for a very rough time in the coming years. But what must happen if we have any hope to predominate is to return to the policies of the Trump years. And that means taking a very tough line on China and wielding the full range, of tools at our disposal, which do include, yes, economic measures like sanctions and tariffs, but also working with our allies. For example, what's called the Quad in Asia, meaning the group of Australia and India and the United States well, what am I missing? Australia, India.
Oh, you got South Korea, you got Japan, you got
and Japan. That's the Quad. But yes, obviously South Korea too, and many other countries there, Philippines, and so forth. But so working with allies, but also wielding the full range of information operations that we were just talking about the Chinese doing. We've got to do a better job of messaging, and not just messaging outwards, but countering the disinformation that's coming in from the other side. I don't see any of that happening right now. There has been some attention focused, for example, on Chinese who had infiltrated academia and our public health system, for example, at universities through the 1,000 Talents program or the Confucius Institutes, who had infiltrated into some of our national labs, CDC, NIH, and some of those have been identified and sent packing, and that's to the good. But more of this. I mean, just the whole full set of tools in our kit need to be deployed, and I don't see that happening right now.
Well, we do have those, and on both sides of the house, both parties do possess those capabilities. Unfortunately, they use it against each other to win political races, rather than taking that energy and concentrating it on defeating China in its information operations. If we weren't so greedy and we cared about America, and we actually had those two political parties that we have focused specifically about beating this threat, they could take all the lessons learned that they have, which they apply all these information operational schemes, but they only do it for political races, for themselves to be in power. They never apply it, unfortunately, to be able to defeat the enemy of the United States. Claire, I know. Go ahead, Claire.
I was just going to mention very quickly, you very rightly pointed out China's determination to deploy space technology. I mean, this is quite apart from 5G and everything else, but it's connected. Obviously, it's linked to that. Note that China just landed a rover on Mars this past week, right? So that focus on outer space and the deployment of advanced technology and capabilities into space is very much part of the China agenda. And with President Trump's establishment of the Space Command, that was a very good step in the right direction for the United States. But that has to be picked up and continued at some point.
It has to, and you cannot start by firing the commander of Space Command because he speaks badly about the Chinese Communist and Marxist ideology in the United States. I mean, it is ridiculous. We are literally working for the Chinese. And unfortunately, I hope we don't have individuals out there who are just slaves to the Chinese. It seems that money is what is at the heart of it. And if you have individuals, folks, that are willing to sell the country for $1, then eventually this is what you're going to lead into. And I hope that's not it. I hope that we have Americans out there who are patriots, regardless of the political party that they come from or whatever their ideologies are when it comes to whether it be social or non-social issues, economic issues. But we are in a bad position currently, and it doesn't seem like we have good leadership that is focused on how to beat the Chinese Communist Party operations. And unfortunately, they're using our taxpayer dollars to defeat us. But that said, Claire, I know that we could sit here and talk for hours, but we will have you back again. I do want to make sure that our audience knows that if they want to hear more about you and read about you, that we have a QR code on the bottom. If they just aim their camera to it, it's going to take them to your Twitter feed. And Claire, every time you come here, you've actually given golden nuggets. I don't know what our politicians are using those golden nuggets for, but I'm hoping it's making it somehow into the policy perspective. And with that said, I'm going to give you the last word, close out as to what you think we need to focus on, and give us some hope since we depressed people with our interview today.
Yeah, that was quite a dose of doom and gloom, I suppose, and apologies for that, but it's necessary, that the American people understand what we're up against. And even if our media and our political leadership are not explaining, this is a place, and I thank you, Sargis, for the platform to talk about this, to inform people, not to depress them, not to send them into depression, but rather to be alert, to understand what is going on, so that, for example, they can get behind candidates. We've got a midterm election coming up next year in 2022. You yourself, for example, get behind candidates for office at every level, but certainly the congressional level, at the House of Representatives and the Senate, who, will support the policies, that the American people need and want. So I guess that's what I would say, to be alert, to be engaged as a patriot citizen, even at the local level, or maybe I should say especially at the local level. I think that's especially the most important. At the local level. Yeah, I very much agree. Definitely.
No, I mean, look, even today, we didn't open up our opening because when we did it last week, Facebook uses to shadow ban us again. So when you can't even have an American's voice be heard, and there's nothing you're saying here that is not for the benefit of the country, it is very difficult. So we will continue to fight, and you're doing a marvelous job, Claire. To be honest, I think that it's patriots like you who have dedicated their time and their lives to defending this nation, who are in the long run are going to be able to be the saving grace for where we need to be able to have a capability that is going to finally defeat this movement by China. Because at the end of the day, if you don't do it now in this fashion, when our allies and the Quad start saying, you know what, the heck with it, we're all going to get our hands on the nukes, you're going to have a much worse of a world that you have to deal with than anything else. And there's going to be a time where the China will realize they went too far. Unfortunately, then it's going to be too late for the entire world polities, rather than what we could do today, just be able to check them. You'll never be able to destroy them, but you could at least pull their teeth if you have the opportunity. Claire, thank you very much. God blessings, and we will have you back again. With that
Thanks
said,
so
this
much.
new paradigm. Thank you.
31 people were reported dead, 28 in Gaza and 3 in Israel. Even before a barrage sent in retaliation for the destruction of the tower block, which contained a civilian Hamas office, Israel reported that 480 rockets had been fired across the border by Palestinian militant groups. Israel said it had sent 80 jets to bomb Gaza and dispatched infantry and armor to reinforce the tanks already gathered at the border, evoking memories of the last Israeli ground incursion into Gaza to stop rocket attacks in 2014. The White House condemned this week's rocket attacks. At the U.S. State Department, a spokesman said Israel had a legitimate right to defend itself, but that the primary U.S. focus was on de-escalation.
I will say that our message continues to be one of prioritizing de-escalation, urging calm, urging restraint on both sides.
The Israeli military said many of the militants' rockets fired from Gaza had fallen short and wounded Palestinians, and that Israel's Iron Dome air defenses had intercepted the bulk of those that made it across the border. The fighting between Israel and Gaza's armed factions was triggered by clashes between Palestinians and Israeli police at Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque on Monday. Jerusalem, holy to Jews, Muslims, and Christians, has been tense during the Muslim fasting month of Ramadan, with the threat of a court ruling evicting Palestinians in the holy city from homes claimed by Jewish settlers, adding to the friction.